Do I think the verdict was fair? Yes. Do I think it was accurate? No. Amber Heard taking the stand and the verdict. Let's talk about it. Before we get into what she said on the stand, how she said it, blah, 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 I want to talk about some things that I didn't know when I did the first video that I now know. The first thing was that the op-ed mainly spoke about sexual violence, a woman's experience when they are a victim of such acts, and how men in power are protected when accused of these things. The second thing I didn't know is that Johnny had already lost a defamation case. What happened there was the Sun newspaper called him a wife beater, and he basically tried to sue them. Amber was called in to provide evidence to support these claims that he was a wife beater, and he lost the case. And not only did he lose the case, he was found to have committed 12 out of 14 counts of domestic violence against Heard, including sexual violence. Did not know this. However, if you saw my first video, Johnny Takes the Stand, this was not a surprise to me. Third thing I didn't know was that Amber Heard wasn't allowed to share any of this information with the US jury. And not only was she not allowed to tell them, a lot of the evidence that was submitted in the UK trial was rejected by the court in Virginia. Their reasoning was it's much easier to win a defamation case in the UK than in the US. Those are the things I didn't know before doing the first video. I also didn't know that this was the first time ever that a victim of sexual violence has been made to testify live. Now, Amber Heard's lawyer said that she tried to fight against this, but she lost. How did she lose? On what grounds was it suddenly okay to make Amber Heard do the trial live? Now, I saw quite a bit of her on the stand, and from what I saw, she was very direct in her answers. Very direct. She was very honest about things that she didn't even need to be honest about. Now, that doesn't mean she's not manipulating the situation, but this is what I saw. A manipulator can be very honest until they're not. So that's not by any means a definitive on her being a trustworthy and honest person. But I had noted that. I also noticed that she did reframe a lot of the questions before answering. Now, I believe that this was done not as a way of avoiding the question. She does actually answer the question, but what she doesn't allow is for the lawyer to put words into her mouth. Take a look.
You have no visible injuries to your face, do you?
None that you can see.
Even though Mr. Depp whacked you in the face so hard that your nose bled?
He did.
While wearing chunky big rings, right?
That's correct.
This is a picture of you, Miss Heard?
Yes, it is.
At that event?
Yes, it is.
The night after the Met Gala?
Yes, it is.
The night after Mr. Depp allegedly broke your nose?
I'm not sure if it was broken, for the record, but yeah, you should see what it looked like underneath the makeup.
He whacked you so hard in the face you thought you had broken your nose.
Exactly.
Right. Let's talk about the writing on this mirror. So the writing in black paint is for Mr. Depp, correct?
It's all from Mr. Depp.
And it's your testimony under oath that you did not write the red text that says, quote, "Call Carly Simon, she said it better, babe," end quote.
That's correct.
Because if you did write that, it means that your husband was walking around the house bleeding from his amputated finger, and you're writing snarky messages to him on a mirror, right?
I don't know what your question to me is. I'm sorry.
Let's please take a look at Defendant's Exhibit 1830.
I mean, Johnny's team didn't fight fair. They did not fight fair. What I saw happening a lot of the time with Camille, and I know a lot of people love her, but sorry, this is what I say. Instead of asking questions and then using the answers to build her case, she was ramroding her into a corner. She was trying to make her say things that she wanted her to say. Now, this woman was always saying objection, leading. This woman was a leading magician, constantly trying to lead Amber into a corner. Constantly.
You testified that this was the result of damage that occurred on December 15th, 2015. Yes or no?
I just need to orient myself because I'm just looking at a picture of a partial picture of a
Ms. Heard, you didn't just look at a picture. You looked at your testimony.
You pointed me towards the page and then asked me a question. I haven't actually reviewed it. I don't know if this was submitted in relation to that incident.
Let's actually leave out Defendant's 512 and please pull up Defendant's Exhibit 725. You've seen this photograph as well, right?
I have.
On the third day of your direct testimony, you testified that this photograph reflected spilled wine in Penthouse 5 on May 21st, 2016, didn't you?
Again, I don't know because I'm looking at a partial picture of a floor, so unless you remove the metadata you've covered up, we could then tell. If you
I didn't cover it up, Your Honor.
Could we unredact
Your
it
Honor.
then so we could get context?
That's how it's in evidence.
That's how it's in evidence.
Next question.
Well, the metadata next to it is so that
Ms.
to
Heard,
avoid this
Ms.
sort of
Heard,
confusion.
there is no question pending, and I would appreciate it if you wouldn't be making argument to the jury.
Sorry, I thought you had asked me about it.
No, I didn't ask you about anything.
At one point, she was unable to sequence the events that had happened during what she claimed was a traumatic situation.
So he's holding the bottle, is that your testimony? While he's holding you down by the neck?
Sorry. What was your question?
Was it in his hand before or after he holds you down by your neck?
I was being held down while he assaulted me with the bottle.
When he puts you on the counter, does he have the bottle in his hand, yes or no?
As I have always said, I don't remember exactly what happened first. I don't remember the sequence. I just remember being aware that I was being assaulted by a bottle while I was on the countertop.
A lot of people took this as evidence that she was lying. However, it's a fact that trauma does this. When you've been traumatized or when you've experienced a traumatic situation, you can forget whole sections of the event. And you also find it hard to put things in the correct logical order. When this happened, when that happened, when the other happened. And not only does Camille not take this into consideration, she uses it as an attack against her. Check it out.
Quote, you testify under oath. While he was smashing the phone, Johnny severely injured his finger, cutting off the top of it, end quote. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So you testified in this courtroom that after Mr. Depp smashed the phone, he held you down on the countertop by the neck. Do you remember that?
I'm not quite sure of the exact sequence of things, but yes, both of those things happened.
Well, we'll get to the sequence. And this is when Mr. Depp supposedly assaulted you with a bottle, right?
On the countertop, he assaulted me.
So Mr. Depp was able to get you on the counter, right?
He held me down by my neck.
And hold you down by your neck.
That is correct.
And he grabbed a bottle, according to you, while holding you down by the neck, correct?
I'm sorry, can you clarify what you're asking me?
While Mr. Depp is holding you by the neck against the countertop, he grabs a bottle. That's your testimony.
No, those two things didn't happen at the exact same time, no.
So he's holding the bottle, is that your testimony? While
was
he's
holding
holding you
mine.
down by the neck?
Sorry. What was your question?
Your testimony is, Ms. Heard, that either he has the bottle before or after he's holding you by the neck on the counter. Is that your testimony?
He held me by the neck on the counter.
Where's the bottle? That he has
At what point?
while holding you down by your neck.
When he was assaulting me with the bottle, it was in his hand.
Was it in his hand before or after he holds you down by your neck?
I was being held down while he assaulted me with the bottle.
When he puts you on the counter, does he have the bottle in his hand, yes or no?
As I have always said, I don't remember exactly what happened first. I don't remember the sequence. I just remember being aware that I was being assaulted by a bottle while I was on the countertop.
So he penetrates you with this bottle. But you don't know how he got the bottle, right?
That is correct.
And he did that right after he lost the tip of his right middle finger.
Again, I don't remember the exact sequence of those events.
We'll get to the sequence. And while he was on 8 to 10 MDMA pills, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about the sequence. This is the sequence of events you testified to in this courtroom. That he smashed the phone to smithereens and then assaulted you, lost the tip of his finger, and then assaulted you with a bottle. Yes? That's the sequence of events that you testified to in this courtroom.
To be clear, you're putting it in order when you say words like then. I have never claimed that I can remember the exact sequence of these things. This was a multi-day assault that took place over 3 horrible days.
Ms.
It's the
Heard,
worst thing that ever
Ms.
happened
Heard,
to me. I
we're
don't
not
remember
Ms.
the
Heard,
exact
that's
sequence.
not my question. My question isn't about the 3-day assault allegedly that occurred. I'm just talking about the sexual assault that you now allege occurred.
Yes,
Okay?
correct.
Let's talk about the sequence.
Now, if you're not really clued up on domestic violence and trauma and how it affects the brain, you could get away with that. But this is a case centered around domestic violence. I think this should have been taken into consideration. This is absolutely disgusting. Absolutely freaking disgusting. I can't even right now. This lawyer wasn't taking into account the trauma bond, wasn't taking into account the effects of trauma on the brain. None of this stuff was taken into account when dealing with Amber, even though they all know that there was so much evidence to suggest that he did do those things, that he lost the court case in the UK. This wasn't a trauma-informed hearing. Now, how can you have a case about domestic violence and not take into consideration the experience that someone has after domestic violence? And worst yet, using it to support the fact that she's lying. How did the court allow this even? Camille even had the audacity to question her about photo evidence, implying that she hadn't submitted it to the court, knowing damn well that she'd submitted it to the court, but that stuff was rejected. Check it out.
You also testified that Mr. Depp, again, whacked you in the face after the Met Gala in May of 2014, right?
That is correct.
You testified that you thought he hit you so hard he broke your nose.
That's correct.
You said your nose was, quote, swollen, discolored, red.
That is correct. I took a picture of that.
You testified you took a picture of your face after this.
I did.
But you didn't show that picture to the jury, did you?
I would like to.
But you didn't show it, did you?
That's not up to me.
You understand you were under an obligation to produce all photographs after any alleged incidents of violence, right, Ms. Heard?
I produced everything.
You didn't produce any photographs after the Met Gala.
I produced everything.
You also understand that you're under an obligation to produce all medical records reflecting any injuries you allegedly sustained from Mr. Depp, correct?
That's correct.
And you haven't produced any pictures or any medical records reflecting a broken nose after the Met Gala in May of 2014, have you?
I have given everything to my lawyers. Everything. I've turned over literally everything that I have.
So let's get this right. She was asking her for these photos, implying that the reason why she hadn't presented it is because she was lying about the whole thing, knowing that she had presented it and it had been rejected by the court. This is just disgusting behavior. This girl was fighting so dirty. They literally tied her hands behind her back and then condemned her for not being able to swing a punch. In fact, has anybody heard of Dalvo? I hadn't heard of Dalvo until yesterday. Now, in the first video, I did a lot of talking about how he's switching the roles, making himself the victim. There's actually a tactic used in court called Dalvo where they do this. They make the person who's claiming to be the victim the aggressor, and they themselves become the victim. It's actually a tactic. Not only was that tactic used in the courtroom, it was used outside the courtroom on social media to undermine her entire case. And whilst we're on the subject of twisting the facts, manipulating and lying, let's look at the issue of perjury, because everybody's looking at Amber and saying that she could be charged for perjury, for saying that she'd donated the money to charity when she'd only pledged it. However, no one seems to be paying attention to the fact that Johnny lied on the stand, not once, but at least twice. First, by saying that she cut off his finger when he did it himself, and secondly, by denying that he'd ever touched her, when clearly he has physically assaulted her, which can be heard via audio recording. So why isn't he being charged with perjury? I'm just confused at how people are confidently overlooking these things in regards to Depp, yet crucifying Amber for something that's not even related to the case, really. I mean, donate, pledge. This guy lied about actual information related to the actual case. Like, what's not clicking here? On top of just slinging accusations at Amber, Camille also is questioning her in a way in which she literally can't win. Camille even questions her for not taking a photograph after she'd been raped with the bottle. It's like Heard can't do right for wrong. If she takes pictures, it's a setup. And if she doesn't take pictures, it's because it didn't happen. Like, make it make sense. I don't know, but I'm just thinking maybe she didn't take pictures because after being rammed with the bottle a couple of times in her hoo-ha, she wasn't really feeling up to it. I'm not sure, but I'm just guessing. Now, you could argue, well, she took pictures of everything or the writing on the wall, but that's not her. That is not a picture of her. To get in front of a camera, that's a big deal after something like that. So let's put this into perspective. They held out most of her evidence, and then they used the fact that she didn't have the evidence against her to make it look like she was lying in the courtroom. The general public doesn't know that trauma makes you forget things, makes it hard for you to put things into sequence. So when she's grilling her about the sequence of events that she is saying that she can't not remember or tell her, she's doing it to make her look as though she's lying, even though this is what naturally happens when you've been traumatized. This woman fought so freaking dirty. It was disgusting. With everything that I know now, I'm looking at the case and I'm like, how is this situation allowed to happen? It's almost as though everything that she spoke about in the op-ed about people in power being able to dominate things, being able to control things, being able to cover things up was happening in front of our faces. In front of our faces. As for the verdict, do I think the verdict was fair? Yes. Do I think it was accurate? No. What do I mean by that? I mean it was fair because she didn't present enough evidence to show that he had been sexually violent towards her. I mean, yes, she gave her account of what happened, but an account of what happened isn't evidence. It's not. It's just not. So no, I don't think she produced enough evidence to prove that she was sexually assaulted. I believe that she was, but the evidence wasn't there. She also didn't produce enough evidence to show that she had experienced this post-separation abuse and mistreatment from Depp's team, from the powers that be. Now, in her defense, both of those things were pretty damn hard things to prove without medical records, which Johnny already knew she didn't have because she didn't get checked out. And the way in which people of this nature are protected is often in a way that doesn't lend itself to acquiring evidence. Was it accurate? I don't think it was an accurate judgment at all because half the facts weren't there. How could it be accurate? And let's not forget that the strategy of Davo was being applied. She was also being cornered at all times and shut down whenever she tried to speak on anything that was outside of what she was being cornered into. It was actually quite criminal. And people say she shut down her lies, but let's just take a moment to imagine that she wasn't lying. Take your opinion of her lying out of the equation and just look at what happened. Would that be okay if she was telling the truth? Because I hear a lot of people justifying what happened because apparently Heard was lying, but nobody knows whether she was lying or not. Nobody was there. All we know is that the evidence that she did give to attempt to prove that he sexually assaulted her and also prove the mistreatment she experienced after separating from him wasn't adequate. We also know that some of the evidence she did have was suppressed and that she wasn't allowed to speak on the evidence that was suppressed. We also know from the false accusations made by Johnny regarding being abused that Dalvo was applied heavily in this case and supported by Johnny's team, mainstream and social media. That's what we know now. Now, after the verdict, now that everybody slandered her online, this is what we know. Oh, we also know that Johnny has another case of assault. Apparently he assaulted a crew member. Let's take a moment to look at his upcoming case for a sec. So the same legal team were planning to represent him in this new trial. And guess what? Apparently JD will not have to attend this trial because of a leaked photo that shows JD and the accuser hugging. Apparently, this is proof that he didn't assault him. Oh, and their defense is that this crew member isn't suing him because Depp actually assaulted him, but is actually suing him for his money. Another gold digger. So we have more leaked evidence that proves nothing. We have more accusations of people wanting his money. And whilst I don't know the details of this specific case, I can't help but notice the similarities here, right? The fact that he is on trial for assault, again, screams volumes to the very nature that is behind the person who is walking around court, shaking hands with everybody and being the perfect gentleman. Now, nothing's been proven, so this is all alleged. I'm sure this will be kept very quiet, but we will see. Johnny said that she was the reason why he'd lost all his deals and this, that, and the third, but then we hear that he assaulted a crew member. So maybe maybe he wasn't getting these roles because of his own drunken, drug-induced behavior. If you look at the areas at which he won.
Mr. Depp's claim against Ms. Heard. 1. As to the statement appearing in the online op-ed entitled, Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change. In the Washington Post online edition, quote, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change, end quote. Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes. 2. As to the statement appearing in the op-ed entitled, A Transformative Moment for Women in the Washington Post print edition and the online op-ed, Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change. In the Washington Post online edition. Quote, then 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out, end quote. Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes. 3. As to the statement appearing in the op-ed entitled, A Transformative Moment for Women in the Washington Post print edition and the online op-ed, Amber Heard, I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. That has to change. In the Washington Post online edition. Quote, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse, end quote. Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
These points that he won in court were very, very specific. Whilst this shows that the jury didn't believe Depp sexually assaulted her or treated her unfairly after the separation, this proves nothing about him being physically or psychologically abusive. Nothing. So basically, this jury doesn't disprove the wife beater case in the UK. It doesn't. However, after this verdict, Johnny releases this. I want you to pay close attention to the language being used here because it's a very good example of what abusers do. It's vague enough that he cannot be pinned down because he knows what he's saying is absolute BS, but specific enough to imply that he is completely innocent of all accusations ever said about him. Excuse me, sir. You're saying this as though it was just a load of media slander about you and you just couldn't get a break. But there was a whole case in the UK that you lost because you were found to have committed 12 out of 14 cases of domestic violence against this woman. Not just media slander, a whole freaking court case. I think you missed out a huge chunk there. And the fact that you won this case, which was centered around sexual violence and whether you did or didn't sexually assault her, does not confirm that you were not domestically abusive. It doesn't confirm this at all. Now, there are people saying that the UK trial was trash and there would have been a different outcome had there had been a jury rather than the decision being made by one single judge. So what you're saying is there would have been a more accurate outcome if random people were taken off the street to judge the evidence as opposed to a lawyer who has studied for years and has moved up the rankings and has experience and skill in assessing and evaluating evidence. What? Make it make sense. In conclusion, Amber Heard says that she is going to file for an appeal. And I don't know how that's going to work for her. I don't know whether they're going to allow her to appeal. And I don't even know if she's going to go through with it. And quite frankly, I wouldn't blame her if she didn't want to, because this has been an absolute shit show for her. Absolute shit show. Let's take a closer look at what actually happened to her during this trial. She was falsely accused of being the abuser. She was accused of being a gold digger, even though she remained financially independent of Depp throughout their relationship. She was accused of having a mental health disorder that no one had ever noticed before. Not her family, not her friends, not her co-workers, not her doctors. Nobody had ever noticed this mental illness until Depp decided to sue, and at which point experts came out of the woodwork to confirm that, of course, she was clearly mentally unstable and accused of ruining his life with false accusations. But let's break it down. What did she actually do? She got a restraining order, which, considering he was abusive, was her right. She was called in to speak her truth when Johnny Depp accused the Sun of falsely labeling him a wife beater. And she wrote an op-ed that spoke in favor of women and supporting women who have been abused, which doesn't mention his name and barely speaks about her own abuse.
What were you trying to accomplish by the op-ed?
I was trying to raise awareness around some of the issues that I just mentioned. There was some legislative reform, Title IX being one of them, and there was just a greater cultural conversation being had around gender issues, and I was happy to weigh in on what I saw as the unique phenomena that women and typically women experience in our culture when they come forward against somebody more powerful, when they speak up about gender-based violence. And I was wanting to lend my name at that specific time to potentially advance the causes within the op-ed.
Because of your success as Mira with Aquaman?
Yeah, just the publicity of the movie and the success of the movie would hopefully, in best case scenario, only add and lend itself would lend attention to the issues that the op-ed aimed to address.
Now let's look at what he did. He tried to ruin her life by abusing her for years. And then when she finally starts to heal and begins to step into the power of her story and uses that voice to help others, he humiliates her publicly via his team, via his fans, via his audience, and tries to take that away from her too.
What, if any, discussion did you have with him about a smear campaign?
Johnny told me that he would ruin me, that no one would ever touch me, meaning professionally, no one would ever work with me again, that I'd never work again, that I'd be selling Depends, is what he said. And that he'd ruined my career, and he refused to not engage up until that point, he refused to not engage with the press by leaking.
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
How is that speculation?
This is what he's telling her, correct?
Right.
Okay, all right, I'll overrule the objection.
And up until that point, I was trying to, get him to call the dogs off, call it off, because it was forcing me into a position where he was calling me a liar, and he was forcing me to prove it. And I knew that wasn't going to be good for him. But he was calling me a liar and having a really sophisticated, very, very well-paid, very sophisticated PR machine.
Objection, Your
going
Honor,
overtime.
calls for speculation.
I never defend myself that way. I never see myself as a victim. It's too fault, you know?
All right, yeah.
And when they came, I did not cooperate with them. It has been used against me, not by the media, by your side.
What did you do once the ACLU had your agreement to be the spokesperson for the op-ed, to put your name to it?
I sought the advice of my attorney.
And why did you do that?
Well, because I didn't want to get into any sort of legal issue. I didn't want to have any sort of legal problems for talking about what happens to women or people when they come forward and speak about these sorts of issues, especially when they come forward against someone more powerful than them. And that backlash, the retaliation that people face when they come forward is exactly what I was writing about. And I didn't want Johnny to retaliate against me and quite literally prove my point.
The public humiliated her because they were convinced that she was lying based on basically what Johnny said and what Johnny's team presented, which hopefully we can all see now was a bunch of manipulative lies. Now I want you to pay attention to what I'm saying here, because this isn't about Johnny specifically. This is about what abusers do. They will try to ruin you by abusing you. And when that doesn't work, they'll come back and try to ruin whatever positivity you create as a result. This is why you got to get rid of them and keep them out of your life for good. I'm going to do another video about the smear campaign and flying monkeys, because I think it's not only relevant to this case, but relevant to abuse generally. A lot of what you saw happening in the social media sphere during this case, the humiliating of her, the means of her, and all of the rest of it was a perfect example of a smear campaign. So I want to talk about that in general, not specific to this case, because it's a very powerful technique that abusers use to get people on side and to also further abuse their targets. And as you can see from this case, it works very well. I'm thoroughly disgusted by what I witnessed people doing to Amber based on what they perceive to be the truth, without even knowing for sure whether this was true or not. To actually go out and attack that woman the way that I saw that woman being attacked is disgusting. There's no justification for it. There's none. Nothing. No justification. We can't go around doing that based on what we think is the truth. It's ridiculous, the venom and the attack that was sent her way. And as people, we have to do better to not allow these things to happen, to not allow our judgments to be overrun by emotional manipulation, because that's all that was. The guy claimed that he was abused and everybody just went for her.
Quote, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse, end quote.
Those are my thoughts. That's what I wanted to share with you guys today. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know how you feel about what I've said here in the comments. What were your views on the Amber Heard and Johnny situation? Has anything I've said here made you think about it a little bit differently? Let me know in the comments. If you're in a toxic relationship and want to break away from it, want to rebuild your confidence after it, any of the above, I have everything you need in order to achieve that. You can book a chat with me also. All links will be found in the description box. And to my subscribers, thank you very much for supporting me. Give this video a thumbs up. To new subscribers, welcome. Please support this channel by subscribing, giving this video a thumbs up, sharing this out to anyone you feel could really benefit from this message, and leaving your view in the comments. And failing all of that, you can also show this channel love by typing hashtag Living Warriors in full effect in the comments. Thank you in advance, and until the next time, live boldly, live empowered, live from the inside out. Bye for now.